Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure being part of this event on Afghanistan, which is the boiling hot topic of the year. Coming straight into the subject, in the backdrop of what has already been discussed, let's take a look at Afghanistan from the perspective of its economy. In the context of what's happening today, when we are being fed 24/7 images of unopposed Taliban through the streets of Kabul, and the heart-wrenching images of humanitarian crisis that is unfolding, economy and development of Afghanistan may sound too far and too feeble and not urgent enough to merit attention now. But that really may not be the case, because the economic damage will take far longer to heal than political damage. And also the important fact that political damage and social wounds cannot heal without a significant economic revival. Ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan has traditionally been a nation forever in turmoil. It has always been so, particularly in the last 5 decades. Conquering Afghanistan has not been a problem, but governing it has always been, whether it was for the invaders or for Afghan rulers themselves. As you leave the towns and highways of Afghanistan and head for the mountains and desert, no dispensation ever has been able to maintain its influence in Afghanistan. Rural Afghanistan is often described as village republics, self-reliant, social units. Their life has largely remained unaltered by the events in the cities and particularly in the capital Kabul. They have never been integrated with the mainstream, least of all economically. Ladies and gentlemen, I will try and give you an economic perspective of Afghanistan from the point of view of a strategic analyst and not from the point of view of an economist. So let me do some random picks for an overview of Afghanistan's economy. If you see Afghanistan area, it is equivalent to the combined area of our states of Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. Population wise, it has about 32 million, comparable to Kerala, which has got almost the same population, or it is 3 times that of our state of Uttarakhand. When you come to density of population, it has 46 per square kilometers, comparable to India's 382 of of our Arunachal states, Arunachal Pradesh 17. Coming to GDP in nominal terms, it is $20 billion. Himachal is $22 billion, and Kerala, just for a comparison, has 6 times Afghanistan's GDP, at about $120 billion a year. And if we compare the per capita GDP in nominal terms again, it is less than 1/4 of India's at just about $500 per head per year. Ladies and gentlemen, Afghanistan has been conditioned to receiving external aid for over 100 years. If you see, first it was the British who paid off the emirs to meet good relationship in the region and to facilitate their trade routes and also to maintain a degree of hegemony. Then came the Soviets with the aid and chaos that they brought along, followed by United States with more aid, huge reconstruction objectives, and all that we are seeing today. The question now is, who will follow next? Will it be China? From whatever we have seen of China, the Chinese concept for economic assistance seems to be solely through loans and not through financial aid. There is not a single example so far where China has successfully assisted a country in its economic revival. And there is no reason to believe that this outlook will change. After all, ladies and gentlemen, China itself is, as of now, still some distance away from breaking the middle income barrier. Where does Afghanistan stand in terms of its hunger for this external economic aid today? The answer to this is evident if we take a look at Afghanistan's budget. Now, that is Afghanistan's budget for the year 2018. All figures are in Afghani billions, ladies and gentlemen. If you see, you can see well over 60% of the revenue for the budget comes in the form of external grants and loans. And if we take the development budget, it is almost 80% from through funded from external aid. And if we consider the operating budget, which is the equivalent of our revenue budget for the day-to-day running of the country, even for that, about two-thirds of it comes from in the form of external aid. A century of living on external aid has created rampant corruption and actually worsened the problem the financial aid seems to or set out to solve in the first place. Let us take a look at some of the salient features of this aid, the aid nurtured economy of Afghanistan. If you see Afghanistan's economy, I will cover just some of the salient features. The main source of revenue of Afghanistan is external aid, as I just explained, and we saw it from the budget of 2018. Out of whatever revenue generated internally, import duties caters for almost 50% of the domestic revenue. And as you understand, being a landlocked country, this comes entirely through the border checkposts of Afghanistan. The traditional subsistence agricultural economy of Afghanistan has been almost totally destroyed through bombing, scattered mines, and such terrorist activities. Another thing which is of particular interest to us is the fact that 28% of Afghanistan's economy is spent for security related expenditure. If we compare with other low income comparable countries, this head covers only about 3%. Now, 3% in case of comparable countries and 28% in case of Afghanistan makes world of a difference. Aid inflow in case of Afghanistan has actually remained directly proportional to the quantum of international troops present in the country. And just to highlight this point, around 2009, 2013, when the international troops numbers were between 130,000 to 100,000, Afghanistan received as much as 100% of its GDP in the form of external aid. As the troops level tapered off by about 2020, when the foreign troop level dropped to about 10,000, the external aid also dropped to about 40%. Now, the international troops present in the country also contributed in a lot of other ways to the economy of Afghanistan. And just to quote an example, Bagram Air Base, which was active and fully running till about June this year, was the source of source of employment for over 30,000 locals around the airfield. That just shows us the dependence or the benefits that the foreign troops, whether it was the UN troops or the US troops or the other UN contributions, made indirectly to the economy of Afghanistan. Ladies and gentlemen, today Afghanistan is faced with multidimensional poverty in terms of income, healthcare, education, security, and freedom. Let us dwell a little deeper into Afghanistan's economy. Decades of war and turmoil has created an open war economy in Afghanistan. What does this war economy do? It triggers a set of activities which is actually focused on bringing economic returns basically to the perpetrators of the turmoil. And what are the dimensions of this war economy? The first dimension is the drug or the opium economy. 80 to 85% of the world's opium production comes from just one country, that is Afghanistan. As per a 2015 UN report, Afghanistan is the producer of the entire opiates consumed by countries along the Balkan route. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Balkan route is referred to the drug route which emanates from Afghanistan. If you see on the right corner in bluish uh, square, red square highlighted, and it flows from Afghanistan predominantly to Iran, a little spillover into through Pakistan, and thereafter to Turkey, and from then on to the southern and eastern Europe. Now, the Balkan route drug trade is valued at a huge $28 billion a year. Now, this money, even if it is a drug money or it's illegal trade money, the single largest beneficiary of this drug trade is the Iranian chain, which makes almost $8 billion a year out of this 28 billion. And if you put together all the European retailers, they make about $18 billion a year. Out of whatever is left, about $1 billion goes to Turkey traders, and only about $500 million comes to Afghanistan, which is the fountainhead of the global drug trade. Even out of the about $500 million, bulk of it goes to the traders and by way of paying taxes. I mean extortion to people like of Taliban or the other groups. Only a very small, insignificant fraction of this actually goes to the actual cultivators of poppy. There is also a huge inflow of smuggled consumer goods from the global duty-free hub of Dubai to Pakistan via Afghanistan. The next pillar of the war economy is illegal mining. Afghanistan mineral wealth is assessed at a very high $1 trillion, but it remains hugely untapped. But there are numerous informal, small, but illegal mines. Mining, like drugs, has been financing the conflict, and together they form the lifeline for groups like Taliban and even the Islamic State of Khorasan. Afghanistan, ladies and gentlemen, is rich in iron ore, aluminum, lithium, talc, gold, uranium, and even has some rare earth deposits. The extent of official mining in Afghanistan remains very low compared to the huge mineral resource that it has. But unfortunately, even from this modest level of official mining, the government's loss of revenue due to rampant corruption is huge. And to highlight that, let me show you the figures. If you consider the official figures of Afghanistan's coal export to Pakistan for the period 2015-18, this becomes very clear. The official figures of Afghanistan for the cost of coal exported to Pakistan during this period says $30 million. If you take the official figures of Pakistan for the same coal that is imported by Pakistan for the same period shows $68 million. And further, to elaborate it a little more, Afghanistan officially says that it exports coal at the rate of $48 per ton. And Pakistan shows officially their import price of the same coal from Afghanistan at $87 a ton. This is a small part of Afghanistan's big corruption story. Now, because of such corruption, Afghan government's revenue from mining today is a mere $42 million a year. And the estimated leakage out of this small amount of official mining is about 4 times this loss. That is about $125 million a year. Just to put things in perspective, Taliban's revenue from illegal talc mining alone, Afghanistan is supposed to have very high quality talc. This illegal talc mining alone is estimated to be around $10 million a year. The next pillar of Afghanistan's war economy is transit trade. I had already mentioned earlier that custom duties at border crossing is the second biggest source of revenue for Afghan government after the foreign aid. Border crossings, therefore, are extremely critical to the country's economy. In the month of June this year, Afghan government's income, the revenue from border customs ports was about $91 million. That is just for the month of June 2021. But just a month later, in July 2021, as the border customs ports started falling into Taliban's hands one by one, the government's revenue for the month of July from customs fell to $30 million a year for the month of July. Beyond these three main pillars of the war economy are the related services, related service sector, which is actually stimulated by the drugs trade and the illegal mining. And this includes transportation business, fuel stations, shops, eateries, etc. Now, all these things, every economic activity pays an extortion money to these groups. These groups obviously call them as tax. Having looked at the war economy pillars, it is easy to understand the revenue source of Taliban. For the year 2019-20, it was estimated that Taliban's revenue was about $1.6 billion. And as we have already seen, it's obvious the biggest two contributors to this were drug and illegal mining, both contributing about $400 million each. Now, in the case of drugs, it's a very clean system. 10% tax is levied, extortion, in other words, on every link in the chain, starting with farmers, the local laboratories, traders at every level, and even the transporters, the truckers who do the transportation at various levels. If you will also see extortion and taxes, $150 million. Now, this is in addition to what I have just explained. Every economic activity, like I elaborated, pays an extortion amount, whether it be media, telecom, government projects, shops, land, worth, everyone pays this money to Taliban. Even the journalists, whom these days we see frequently coming on TV and covering Kabul, reporting from the different parts of Afghanistan, each one of them pay Taliban the extortion money and takes permission, and they are even given a journalist pass issued by the group. Our next head is charitable donation, a very innocuous sounding head. Charitable donation, which is almost $250 million. This is the amount which is contributed by various Islamic organizations around the world. Real estate, Taliban's revenue is about 80 million. Like its mentor, the Pak Army, Taliban also holds a large amount of real estate, and from which they make a sizable amount of revenue, as you can see it here. And an undisclosed amount of revenue comes to Taliban from foreign governments, predominantly various Islamic governments around the world. In the context of Taliban's war economy, the country's highways also have a unique story of their own. Being landlocked, as we've already seen, the highways are very critical to Afghanistan's economy. Construction of a 2,000-mile long ring road was started in Afghanistan by the Soviets in the 1950s, but it remained incomplete and very poorly maintained due to perpetual clashes that the country has always witnessed. It is difficult to believe that in 2001, Afghanistan had just about 50 miles of good roads. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine just 50 miles of good roads in the whole of Afghanistan. But post 2001, the United States, along with Japan, World Bank, and other countries, made an ambitious $1.5 billion plan to complete and upgrade Afghanistan's ring road. Kabul Kandahar was identified as the most important segment out of this, and it was to be completed by 2003. The highway work commenced in real earnest, but it was frequently disrupted by Taliban through kidnapping, killings, ambushes, and IED attacks on road construction parties. This imposed huge security cost and skyrocketed the entire road construction budgets. Despite all this, the Kabul Kandahar stretch was completed by 2003. Then Iraq happened and US focus shifted to Iraq. Afghanistan reconstruction tempo reduced. The Taliban attacks, which included blowing up of roads and tracks, increased. And by 2016, we had a situation where the ring road which was a good highway in parts, had become a highway of potholes, debris, and ambush points. The pathetic state of the ring road and the government's lack of control over it was a very accurate reflection of Afghanistan's influence, the Afghan government's influence and capacity. With a marked dip in the level of foreign troops after 2013, Taliban clearly held sway on the ring road and even claimed the ability. Taliban claimed that it can guarantee safe package for anyone who sought and paid for Taliban's protection. Locals say that if you paid Taliban a one-time extortion, which Taliban like to call advance tax, of about $75 for a one-way vehicle move, no one would question you, trouble you, and you were assured of a safe trip. While on the other hand, if you ignored them and trusted the Taliban troops, you actually ended up paying a bribe of about $15 to $20 to the Afghan troops manning each of the 12 checkposts, and that too with no guarantee of safety for movement between the checkposts. Ladies and gentlemen, between 2001 and 2020, US alone had pumped in a whopping $134 billion for reconstruction of Afghanistan, but there's very little to show for it today. The end result of all the money that has been sunk into Afghanistan is best summed up by a local who says that prior to 2001, we had only a dirt track as our ring road. But one could pull up to a side and sleep at night by the roadside. And then came a few good stretches of road after 2001, like the one which you can see. But now in 2020, he says, we have roads which are totally damaged, potholed, and far worse than what we had in 2001 as the dirt tracks. In addition to being the state that we are seeing here, they have the added risk of an ambush site at every turn. Ladies and gentlemen, a war can be brought to a halt through an agreement between parties or one of the parties securing a significant victory, as we probably are witnessing today. But what about an economic revival? The economic quagmire in Afghanistan is getting deeper and deeper with every passing day with no answers in sight. There are only more and more questions being thrown up. Poverty in Afghanistan was 54% in 2017, and the economic situation has turned far worse in 2021. Unlike a political agreement that may be possible overnight, there are no shortcuts to economic revival. Afghanistan's economy today is on a razor's edge. What can a Taliban government do in economic terms? With even semblance of a governance system or a financial institutions worth the name non-existent, the economic journey ahead for Taliban looks very long and steep. To make things worse, private sector and human capital have vanished, negating any possibility of creating and mobilizing domestic resources. Afghanistan today is in greater need for external aid than it had ever been before. Even if, sadly, even if generous aid flows in, basic service delivery will prove an Herculean task. China finds itself in a quandary in many ways. As events unfold, it will be very interesting to see if the geo-economic and geopolitical situation compel China to risk investing in Afghanistan's reconstruction. Will the Islamic nations come together to help? Will rest of the world come to Afghanistan's rescue, knowing fully well that the untrustworthy Pak-Taliban alliance would stand to gain the most from every dollar that flows into Afghanistan, and China would be the biggest beneficiary of stability in Afghanistan and the region. Can Taliban, with its savagery image, ever transform Afghanistan and permit a changeover of Afghanistan's war economy into a formal economy? These are very important questions for which the answers are as vague as the questions. Afghanistan's economy holds the potential to become Taliban's Waterloo. Economy and political stability pose a clear catch-22 situation. While political stability cannot be achieved without certain degree of economic revival itself requires far more than just political stability, Sharia laws, and the financial expertise of Taliban. The writing is on the wall, ladies and gentlemen. Afghanistan's economic burden is likely to remain an orphan, and its economic revival on a road to nowhere, really. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Raj. You can stop recording.